Is something wrong, Lord Momonga?
Albedo kept asking him questions. Momonga did not know how to respond. As it was, there were far too many things he did not understand, so his thought process short-circuited.
Forgive me.
Momonga could only stare dumbly at Albedo, who was standing by his side.
Are you all right?
Albedo's beautiful face drew close to Momonga's as she studied him. A faint fragrance entered his nostrils. The scent seemed to restore Momonga's ability to think, and his mind, which had been hitherto out of commission, slowly returned to normal.
No, nothing is wrong.
Momonga was not the sort of person who made a habit of speaking politely to dolls. However, hearing Albedo's questions instinctively made him want to respond with deference. Her movements, her speech patterns, her whole being radiated an undeniable humanity. Momonga still had the feeling that something was terribly wrong about Albedo and himself, but he had no way of understanding exactly what the problem was. All he could do in this ignorant state was to suppress his fear, shock, and other unnecessary emotions. However, Momonga was a common person and could not do that. Just as Momonga was about to cry out, the words of one of his guild members came to mind.
Panic is the seed of defeat, so you must maintain yourself and think logically. Remain calm, look beyond your surroundings, and don't waste your efforts on unnecessary details, Momonga.
As he recalled these words, Momonga slowly regained his composure. Momonga silently thanked Punito Moe, the Zhugliang of Ainz Ooal Gown.
Is something the matter?
She was close to him now. Albedo was so close he could feel her gentle breaths. Her lovely face dimpled in an adorable way as she asked her question. Momonga, who had calmed himself after much effort, was in danger of being driven into panic again from her nearby face.
The GM call function does not seem to be working.
Entranced by Albedo's limpid eyes, Momonga could not help but question the NPC. In Momonga's past life, he had not received romantic attention from the opposite sex, let alone those of a sexual nature. Although he knew that she was just an NPC, he could not help but be moved by her realistic expressions and movements. However, as his passions stirred within his heart, they were quenched like they had been earlier, and he returned to normal. Momonga felt uneasy at the lack of strong emotions within himself, and he wondered if it was related to the words of his comrade from just now. But was that really the case? Momonga shook his head. Now was not the time to ponder these things.
Please forgive my inability to answer the Supreme One's questions about this GM call. I apologize for not meeting your expectations. Nothing would please me more than a chance to make up for my prior mistake. Please, command me as you see fit.
The two of them were conversing. There was no doubt about that. Learning this fact shocked Momonga so greatly that he could not speak. Impossible. This should have been impossible. The closest thing NPCs could come to conversations was with macroed responses to being addressed in a certain way. There was audio data for roars and cheering for players to download, but actually allowing an NPC to engage in conversation was an impossible task. Even Sebas from just now could only accept simple orders. Why had such an impossible event occurred? Was this phenomenon limited to Albedo? Momonga dismissed Albedo with a wave of his hand, and disappointment flashed across her face as she retreated. Momonga turned his eyes from her body to the butler and the 6 maids, whose heads were still lowered.
Sebas! Maids!
Yes, Lord.
Their voices chorused out as one, and then the butler and maids raised their heads.
Approach the throne.
Understood.
They responded as one, and then rose to their feet. After that, they proudly strode to the front of the throne before dropping to one knee and lowering their heads again. Momonga had learned 2 things from this. The first was that he did not need to specially enter commands on a keyboard. The NPCs would understand his intentions and execute his orders. The second was that Albedo was not the only one who could speak. At the very least, all of the NPCs in this room were exhibiting anomalous behavior. As Momonga thought about this, he suddenly felt that there was something very wrong about himself and Albedo. In order to discover exactly what that something was, he fixed Albedo with a piercing gaze.
Is something wrong? Have I made a mistake?
As he finally realized what the problem was, he did not shout, nor did he keep silent, but he simply sighed imperceptibly. That unexpected breadth of facial expressions, the reason why her mouth could move, and why she could speak.
Impossible.
Momonga hurriedly placed a hand on his mandible and spoke. His mouth was moving. This should have been impossible, going by what he knew about DMMORPGs. A character's mouth would not move with their words. This should have been impossible. The basic premise was that external appearances were fixed. Because of that, facial expressions were impossible to design. In addition, Momonga's face was a skull without a tongue or a throat. He looked down at his hands, and they were the same fleshless pair that he was used to. He could also see that he had no lungs or indeed any other internal organs. But then, how was he speaking?
Impossible.
Momonga could feel the certainty he had in the world evaporating away, replaced by an ever-growing uneasiness. He suppressed his desire to shout out, and like he expected, his surging emotions were suddenly quashed. Momonga slapped forcefully at the throne, but as he expected, no damage values appeared.
What should I do? Is there anything I can do?
He knew nothing about what was going on. Nobody would help him even if he got angry. Then, his first priority should be looking for clues.
Sebas.
He could see an earnest, sincere expression on Sebas' face. He looked like a real person. It should be fine to give him orders, right? Although he had no idea what would happen, he could assume all the NPCs in the tomb were loyal to him, right? For all he knew, the people in front of him might not be the NPCs that everyone had made together. Numerous questions rose up in his mind, floating on a sea of uneasiness. But Momonga forced aside all these emotions. In the end, the only choice he had for reconnaissance was Sebas. He glanced briefly to Albedo, but then Momonga steeled himself and decided to order Sebas out. The mental image of a department chief giving orders to his subordinates appeared in his mind. Momonga took on a superior, commanding attitude and spoke.
Exit the tomb and investigate the surrounding region. If you encounter intelligent creatures, interact peacefully with them and invite them to the tomb. Attempt to accommodate the other party as much as possible during negotiations. Do not stray more than 1 kilometer from the tomb and avoid unnecessary combat.
Understood, Lord Momonga. I will do so immediately.
In Yggdrasil, NPCs made to protect a guild base could not leave it under any circumstances. However, it would seem this ironclad restriction had been overturned. No, he could only be certain of that once Sebas returned.
Select one of the Pleiades to accompany you. If a battle begins, retreat immediately and tell me everything you have learned.
That was simply the first step. Momonga let go of the staff of Ainz Ooal Gown. The staff did not fall onto the ground, but floated in the air as though someone were still holding it. This was in complete defiance of physics, but it was a common sight in the game. There were quite a few items in Yggdrasil which would continue floating in the air when left unattended. The aura of tormented spirits seemed to cling to Momonga's hand as he let the staff go, but Momonga paid it no heed. He was long since used to that sight, or not. Thinking that the macro command would have already been built in, Momonga snapped his fingers and deactivated the aura. Momonga folded his arms. The next step would be...
I should contact the game company.
The game company would know the most about Momonga's present situation. The problem was actually contacting them. Normally, simply using the /shout command or a GM call would put him in touch with a GM instantly. But if these methods did not work either...
Message.
This was a spell used to communicate in the game. Normally, its use was restricted to certain places and conditions. But perhaps, he might be able to make good use of this spell in this current situation. The problem was that this spell was originally designed to communicate with other players, so it might not be able to reach a GM. And in this extraordinary situation, there was no guarantee that the spell would work either.
However,
he had to give it a try. Momonga was a level 100 spellcaster. If he could not cast spells, his mobility, his ability to gather information, and of course, his fighting power would plummet drastically. In these unknown circumstances, he had to verify that he could use magic, and quickly.
Now, where can I go to test my magic?
As Momonga thought about that question, he looked slowly around the throne room, and then shook his head. Although this was an emergency situation, he had no desire to conduct magical experiments in the silent, nearly sacrosanct throne room. He contemplated suitable locations for magical testing, and then a promising place came to mind. There was one more thing he wanted to confirm, in addition to his own abilities. He wanted to be certain of his authority. He had to know whether his powers and privileges as the Guildmaster of Ainz Ooal Gown still existed. Until now, all the NPCs he had met were loyal to him. However, in the great underground tomb of Nazarick, there were several NPCs with levels equal to his own. He had to make sure they were still loyal. However, Momonga glanced at the kneeling Sebas and the maids, and then at Albedo beside him. Albedo was smiling. It was a beautiful smile, but it seemed to be concealing something else behind it. As he wondered what that something else might be, unease crept through Momonga. The NPCs were loyal to him, but would they stay that way? If this were in the real world, subordinates would no longer be loyal to superiors who constantly screwed up. Would the NPCs be that way as well? Or was it that once they were programmed to be loyal, they would stay that way forever? If their loyalty to him wavered, how should he regain it? Rewards? There was vast wealth in the treasury. Although it pained him to expend the treasures left behind by his former comrades, they would probably understand if it was for the sake of Ainz Ooal Gown. The question would then be how large of a reward he should give. In addition, was he superior to others by virtue of being higher ranked? But what criteria could he use to quantify his superiority? He was not clear about that yet. He had the feeling that as long as he kept this dungeon going, he would eventually come to understand these things. Or did that mean...
power?
He opened his left hand and gripped the staff of Ainz Ooal Gown that sailed into his grasp.
Overwhelming power?
The 7 gems set into the staff gleamed brightly, as though imploring their master to use their colossal might.
Forget it. I'll take my time to think about that later.
Momonga released the staff he held, and the wavering staff fell to the ground as though it were angry at him. In any case, as long as he acted the part of the leader, they would probably not raise their hands against him right away. Be it among animals or humans, enemies would probably not attack if their intended prey did not reveal any weaknesses. Momonga declared in a powerful voice,
Ladies! Other from the maid selected to accompany Sebas. The rest of you will head down to the 9th floor and repel any invaders from the 8th floor.
Understood, Lord Momonga.
The maids behind Sebas acknowledged his orders respectfully.
Begin immediately.
Understood, my lord.
Once more, the chorus of voices rang out. Sebas and the maids bowed once more to their lord, who sat upon the throne, then stood and left simultaneously. The giant doors opened and then closed again. Sebas and the maids vanished beyond the doors. It was good that they had not replied with a no, or something similar. A great weight seemed to lift off Momonga's chest. and at the same time he looked at the person who had stayed by his side. That person was Albedo, who had stood by, awaiting orders. She smiled and asked him,
Then, Lord Momonga, what will you have me do next?
Momonga rose from the throne to retrieve his staff, and as he did that, he spoke.
Come to me.
Yes, Lord.
The smiling Albedo drew closer. Although Momonga was wary of the black wand and orb she had been carrying, that caution passed in an instant, and he decided to temporarily ignore its existence. Just as Momonga finished thinking that, Albedo was close enough that he could embrace her if he wanted.
She smells nice. Wait, what am I thinking?
Momonga cast out the thoughts which had rose up inside him again. Now was not the time for fooling around. He reached out his hand to touch Albedo's. A pained expression flickered across Albedo's face. Momonga drew his hand away, like he had received an electric shock.
What's this? Did I make her feel uncomfortable?
Several bad memories ran through his mind, like being hit by loose change that fell from the sky. But in the end, Momonga found his answer. Overlords required levels in the Elder Lich racial class, and among the abilities Elder Liches possessed was the ability to inflict negative energy damage on anything they touched. Was that the reason? Although, even if it really was the reason, he still had some questions to ask. In Yggdrasil, the monsters and NPCs that appeared in the great underground tomb of Nazarick would be recognized as belonging to the Ainz Ooal Gown faction. Since every member of the guild was also flagged as belonging to Ainz Ooal Gown, there should be no problems, even if they attacked each other.
Could it be that she no longer belongs to our guild? Or has friendly fire been enabled?
The latter possibility was more likely. With that conclusion in mind, Momonga apologized to Albedo.
Forgive me. I forgot to deactivate my negative energy touch skill.
Please, pay it no heed, Lord Momonga. That damage barely even registered, and as long as it were Lord Momonga, I would gladly endure any kind of...
Is that so? No, I must still apologize.
Momonga was caught off guard by Albedo's adorable yelp, and the way she shyly covered her face, and his reply ended up being less dignified than he had hoped for. So it was due to the negative energy touch after all. Momonga turned his eyes from Albedo, who was going on and on about how this was nothing compared to the pain of losing her virginity, and began thinking about how to temporarily deactivate the always on skill, and then he suddenly knew how to do it. To Momonga, who wielded the power of an overlord, it was as simple and natural as breathing. After all the shocks and surprises he had received so far, this was hardly worth panicking about. It was frightening how well he had adapted to his condition.
I'm going to touch you.
After deactivating the skill, he touched Albedo's hand. Thoughts like, her hand's so slim, her skin is so white, and so on raced through his head. But he cast aside these male desires and focused on one thing, the pulse at her wrist. It was there. It was a steady rhythm. She was a living being, so it was only natural. Yes, she was alive. Momonga released her hand and looked at his own arms. All he saw was an expanse of polished white bone, bereft of skin or flesh. Because he had no blood vessels, he could not feel a heartbeat. Indeed, an overlord was an undead creature, a being that had transcended mortality itself, so obviously it would not have a heartbeat. He shifted his gaze to Albedo. Momonga saw himself reflected within Albedo's moist golden eyes. Her cheeks were pink, probably because her body was rapidly heating up. The changes in her body surprised him.
What's this?
Is she not an NPC? Is she not pure electronic data? Why does she feel like a real person? What kind of AI could do this? More importantly, why is it that Yggdrasil feels like the real world?
Impossible. Momonga shook his head in denial. There was no way such a fantastic scenario could have occurred, but once the idea took root, it was not easy to eradicate. Momonga was not sure how to proceed given the changes in Albedo. The next step, yes, the final step, if he could confirm that, then all of his predictions would be vindicated. Was this real life? Or was this just fantasy? He had to do this. If she attacked him with that weapon of hers, it could not be helped.
Albedo, may I touch your breasts?
Eh?
The air between them seemed to freeze. Albedo's eyes went wide. A wave of depression washed over Momonga as he considered his words.
I have to do this.
What the hell was he thinking, saying that to a woman? He wanted to scream "despicable" at the top of his voice. Indeed, using one's superior position to commit sexual harassment was the most despicable thing imaginable. But he had no choice. Indeed, he had to do this. As Momonga convinced himself with all his strength, his composure gradually returned to him. Resuming the air of a proper ruler, he continued forcefully.
That should be fine, right?
It was not fine at all. In contrast to Momonga's nervous request, Albedo seemed to be overflowing with joy. She gave him a glittering smile.
But of course, Lord Momonga. Please, help yourself.
Albedo straightened herself up, presenting her ample twin peaks for Momonga's inspection. If he still had saliva, he would have swallowed several times by now. Her breasts swelled up through her dress, and now he was going to touch them. On the other side of his abnormal tension and nervousness, a quiet, calm part of Momonga's brain was observing his own actions. He noted how foolish he was, and wondered why he had thought of this, and why he was still going to follow through anyway. He sneaked a peek at Albedo, and found that her eyes were shining, jiggling her bosom as though to say, "Hurry up and touch me." Not knowing whether it was because of excitement or embarrassment, Momonga steadied his hands with sheer force of will, steeled his resolve, and reached out. The first thing Momonga felt was something hard under the dress, followed by a soft, yielding sensation. As Albedo moaned wetly, Momonga completed yet another experiment. If his brain was normal, there were two possible explanations for his present situation. The first was that this was a new DMMORPG. That was to say, the moment Yggdrasil had shut down, a new game, Yggdrasil 2, had immediately taken its place. However, in light of this experiment, the probability of that being the case was vanishingly small. This was because R18 actions were strictly forbidden in these games. Who knew? Perhaps even R15 actions might be banned as well. Violators would be publicly listed on the game's official website, and their accounts would be deleted, or worse. Once the records of these R18 actions were publicly released, they might be punished for damaging moral culture and thus violating the Social Order Maintenance Act. As such, most people would consider these acts off-limits. If they were still in a game world, the company should have made it impossible for players to do such things. If the GMs and the game companies were watching, they would have prevented Momonga from performing lewd actions. However, there was no sign of any resistance or opposition. In addition, one of the fundamental rulings which pertain to DMMORPGs was that forcing a player to participate in a game without permission could be treated as a form of cyber kidnapping. As such, forcing a player to test out a game in this manner was a prosecutable offense, especially if there was no way to force quit the game. It would not be unexpected for a company to receive fines or jail time for such things. If a situation arose where a player was not able to log out of the game, up to a week's worth of game activity could be stored in a legally mandated record, which would make it easy to prosecute the company for their violations of the law. Therefore, if Momonga did not report to work for a week, someone would have found it strange and come to his house to check on him. Then, all the police would need to do was to access the records with a specialized console, and the problem would be solved. Which company would risk arrest, or worse, to commit a corporate crime like this? Of course, they could try to muddy the waters by saying, this was a closed beta test for Yggdrasil 2, or there were third-party programs used here. But in truth, such a risky matter would have no benefits at all for the game company. That being the case, the only answer for his present circumstances would be that a third party was doing something here, and it had nothing to do with the game company. If that was the case, he would need to throw out all his previous theories and think in other directions. Otherwise, he would never find the answer. The problem was that he had no idea where to start. And there was another possibility. The possibility that the virtual world had become reality.
Impossible.
Momonga promptly rejected that idea. How could such an illogical, foolish thing happen? But on the flip side, the more he thought about it, the more strongly he felt it was the right answer. And then, Momonga remembered Albedo's scent. In accordance to the software legislation for virtual reality games, such games were not allowed to provide sensory data for smell and taste. Although Yggdrasil had food and drink items, consuming them was little more than changing a value in the game system. In addition, the sense of touch was heavily limited, in order to prevent confusion with the real world. These limitations meant that VR systems were not very useful for the sex industry. However, none of these limitations were in effect now. Realizing these facts shocked Momonga. Countless questions like, what about tomorrow's work? What'll happen if this keeps up? Flashed through his mind. But then he cast them all to the back of his mind.
Well, if this virtual world is just a simulation of the real world, then the quantity of data involved must be unimaginable.
Momonga swallowed with a non-existent throat. Though his mind could not comprehend the situation, his heart could. His hands finally left Albedo's ample bosom. He realized that he had been groping her for a long time. But Momonga justified it to himself by saying that he had no choice but to grope her for that long. And it was definitely not because squeezing her supple flesh felt so good that he reluctantly let go of her, or something.
Sorry, Albedo.
A sensual moan came from the red-faced Albedo, and he could practically feel her body heat raising the surrounding temperature. After that, she shyly asked Momonga,
Will I have my first time here?
Momonga was caught off guard by her question, and before he could think clearly, he replied,
First time? What's that? What's this all about? And why does she look so shy?
May I ask how you wish to dispose of my clothes?
What?
Would it be better if I disrobed myself? Or would you like to unwrap me, Lord Momonga? Or, if we did it while I was wearing the dress, afterwards, it would get dirty. No, if you want me to wear this dress, I have no objections, Lord Momonga.
His mind was suddenly frozen, and was unable to parse her question. His brain finally managed to make sense of Albedo's words, although whether there really was a brain under that skull remained to be seen. As Momonga realized why Albedo had this reaction, an immense struggle took place within himself, before he finally said,
Enough. That's all for now, Albedo.
I understand.
Now's not the time for... No, there is no time for that sort of thing.
My apologies. I allowed myself to be ruled by my desires despite the urgency of the situation.
With a swift movement, Albedo made to genuflect an apology, but Momonga stopped her.
No, all of this is my fault. I forgive you, Albedo. But other than this, I have an order.
Please, give me any command you desire.
Tell the guardians of each floor, with the exception of the 4th and 8th floors, to meet at the Colosseum on the 6th floor in an hour's time. I will contact Aura and Mare myself, so there is no need to inform them.
Understood. Allow me to repeat the order. Aside from Aura and Mare of the 6th floor, I am to inform all of the floor guardians to meet 1 hour later at the Colosseum.
Correct. Go.
Yes, Lord.
Albedo swiftly departed the throne room. As he watched the retreating Albedo, Momonga let himself sigh in a way that suggested he was thoroughly exhausted. Once she left the throne room, Momonga groaned painfully.
Oh, what have I done? It was supposed to be a silly joke. If I'd known, I wouldn't have done it. I've soiled the NPC that Tabula Smartina created.
When he thought about it, there was only one reason why Albedo would react like she had. It must have been when he was editing her backstory and changed that line to, "She is in love with Momonga." That must have been why she acted that way.
Oh, shit!
Momonga muttered to himself, thinking about how Tabula Smaragdina had painstakingly created his masterpiece Albedo out of whole cloth. And then someone else had splashed paint all over his work at will. And now she had become like this. The knowledge that he had ruined someone else's hard work made him feel miserable. However, the frowning Momonga, although it could not be seen because he was a skeleton, eventually rose from the throne. Momonga told himself that he had to leave this at the back of his mind. After the important things were taken care of, he could agonize over it later.
To me, demons of the Lamekaton!
The golems which heeded Momonga's command were made of rare metals. They moved before him with an agility that belied their heavy bodies, then took the ready stance they had assumed earlier. Now that Momonga had decided to go with his theory that virtual reality had become reality, his first concern was to guarantee his own safety. Although the NPCs he had met so far had readily obeyed him, there was no guarantee that the others he met would react in the same way. Also, even if they were all friendly, he did not know when danger would next appear. Momonga's life and death hinged on whether or not he could use such things as Nazarik's facilities, the golems, his items, his magic, and so on.
Well, that's one problem solved.
Momonga muttered to himself in relief as he looked at the golems. He then ordered them only to listen to him. That way, even in the worst-case scenario, if one or more NPCs revolted, he would have an ace in the hole. Momonga, satisfied with the mighty-looking golems, looked down at his bony hands. He wore 9 rings on his 10 fingers, and only his left ring finger was bare. Usually in Yggdrasil, one could only wear 2 rings, one on each hand. However, Momonga had used permanent cash items, which were very expensive, to let him wear a full 10 rings, one on each finger, and use all their powers at once. This was not unique to Momonga. Most players who value power would spend that money too. One of the 9 rings Momonga wore had an emblem on it, which resembled the symbol embroidered upon the large red banner behind the throne. That ring was called the Ring of Ainz Ooal Gown. Every member of Ainz Ooal Gown possessed the magic ring that Momonga wore on his right ring finger. Although he could use the power of 10 rings at once, with the aid of cash items, when he applied the cash item, he had to decide which ring he wanted to assign to which finger, and that decision was irrevocable. Even so, Momonga had removed the ring on his left ring finger and sent it to the treasury. The reason why Momonga had assigned that somewhat weaker ring to that finger was because it would be very useful under certain circumstances, but he rarely wore it because it had a constant effect. The power of the Ring of Ainz Ooal Gown was unlimited teleportation between named rooms of the great underground tomb of Nazarik, and it would even allow one to teleport into the tomb from the outside. Since Nazarik was warded to block teleportation into or within itself, except for a few specific areas, this ring was very handy. The only places where this ring could not teleport its wearer was to the throne room and the various guild members' personal rooms. This ring was also required to enter the treasury, which was why he could not do without it. Momonga sighed deeply. After this, he would be using the ring's power. He was not sure if the ring could still do everything he expected of it, but he had no choice except to test it out. As he unleashed the ring's power, the world before him instantly turned black. Right after that, the scenery in front of him changed, and his surroundings were now a dark tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, he could see what looked like a giant lowered portcullis. Within the tunnel were artificial lights.
It worked.
Momonga muttered to himself, relieved at the successful teleport. He walked down the wide and high passage toward the portcullis ahead of him. The stone floor amplified the sound of Momonga's footsteps, and at times he could hear echoes. The torches that lined the tunnel flickered constantly, and as a result, the shadows they made seemed to dance. Bathed in the light of several torches, he cast several shadows at once, and it seemed as though there were multiple Momongas. What passed for his nose should have been little more than an empty hole in his skull, but yet he smelled something as he drew near the portcullis. Momonga stopped and took a deep breath. It was a strong scent of earth and grass, the smell of the jungle. Much like his encounter with Albedo just now, the intensely realistic scent, in a world that should not have possessed such things, only convinced Momonga of the reality of the world he was in. But how did his body breathe without lungs or a windpipe? Momonga felt that thinking too much about such things was foolish, and put it aside. As though it sensed Momonga approaching, the portcullis swiftly raised itself into the ceiling at just the right moment to let him through. Past the barrier, what Momonga saw was a circular arena, surrounded on all sides by many tiers of audience seats. The Colosseum was oval in shape, 180 meters on its long axis, and 150 meters on the short axis. It was 40 meters tall, and modeled after the arenas of the Roman Empire. Continual light spells were cast everywhere, illuminating the grounds in white light, so one could observe the entire Colosseum like it was day. The audience was composed of many clay dolls, golems in other words, which showed no sign of activity. In this Colosseum, the intruders would be the stars of the show, while the ones watching from the VIP box would be members of Ainz Ooal Gown. The main event, of course, would be a brutal melee. Apart from the 1,500-man invasion, every single invader had met their end here. Momonga walked into the center of the arena and looked into the heavens. Before him stretched a black expanse of night sky. Perhaps he might have been able to see the stars if there were no light around him. However, this place was the 6th floor of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, so the sky here was merely a virtual imitation. Even that imitation required a massive amount of data, but as a result, the sky here could change with the time of day, even showing an actual sun with appropriate daylight effects. Momonga could relax himself in this virtual landscape because his heart was still human, as opposed to his skeletal appearance. It was also because he felt a sense of appreciation for his comrades' hard work in building this place. Part of him wanted to just wait and space out here, but the present situation denied him that luxury. Momonga looked around. Nobody was there. The twins should have been minding this place. He noticed something. After the shout, a figure leapt from the VIP box. The figure jumped down from a height of about 6 stories, somersaulted in midair, and landed as though it were a butterfly descending on a flower. There was no magic involved, only pure, physical prowess. It negated the force of the impact with a simple flexing of the knees, and it smiled broadly.
Nailed it!
It made a V sign of victory. A child of about 11 years of age had descended from above. Her face bore a smile that was as bright as the sun. She was adorable, with the androgynous appeal of both a boy and a girl. Her hair resembled threads of spun gold, and it grazed her shoulders. The light reflecting off the strands of hair resembled an angel's halo. Her mismatched eyes, one blue, one red, seemed as eager and sparkly as a puppy's. Her ears were long and her skin was dark. She was a dark elf, a species related to forest elves. She wore a shirt of light leather armor, reinforced with red dragon scales. The emblem of Ainz Ooal Gown was proudly displayed on her vest, stitched in gold onto a white background. Below that, she wore a pair of white pants, matching her vest. A necklace with a glittering golden acorn pendant hung from her neck, and she wore a pair of gloves, reinforced with plates of enchanted metal. A whip lay coiled across her waist and right shoulder, and there was a long bow on her back. The bow stave and grip seemed to be covered in strange decorations.
Aura, is it?
Momonga spoke the name of the dark elf child. He was addressing the guardian of the 6th floor of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, Aura Bella Fiora. She was a skirmisher who was able to summon and tame beasts. Aura jogged over to Momonga. Well, to her, it was a jogging pace, but she was traveling as fast as one of her beasts at full speed, rapidly closing the distance between them. Aura screeched to a halt. Her running shoes had Hihiro Kane metal plates on the soles, and they threw up clouds of dust as they ground against the floor of the arena. The clouds did not touch Momonga's body. If she had planned that, then her skills must have been impressive indeed. Aura was not sweating, but yet she wiped her forehead theatrically. Then, with a puppy-like smile, she greeted Momonga.
Welcome, Lord Momonga. Welcome to the level 1 guard.
The greeting was filled with the same respect that Albedo, Sebas, and the maids had for him, but for some reason it felt more intimate. To Momonga, this intimacy allowed him to loosen up. Being too uptight and scary was quite troublesome for Momonga, who was not experienced with this sort of thing. He could not detect any hostility on Aura's face, and his enemy scan revealed nothing. Momonga's line of sight left the band on his right wrist, and he loosened his grip on the staff of Ainz Ooal Gown. He had planned to strike hard and fade away if an emergency occurred, but it seemed as though there would be no need for that.
I will be intruding for a while.
What are you saying? You're the Master of Nazarick, the Supreme Overlord, right, Lord Momonga? There's no place you'd be intruding if you visited.
I see. Speaking of which, if you're here, Mare is...
Upon hearing Momonga's question, Aura blinked in surprise, as though she had realized some great truth and turned around, shouting loudly upward.
Lord Momonga has graced us with his presence. How rude are you going to be by not showing your face to him?
There was movement in the shadows of the VIP box.
Is Mare there too?
Yes, that's right, Lord Momonga. He's really timid. Oi, jump down here now!
An almost inaudible reply came from the VIP box. Judging by the distance between there and here, it was a miracle the other party could even hear Aura. However, that miracle was the result of the magic on Aura's necklace.
I can't, sis.
Aura took a deep breath and grabbed her head.
Lord Momonga, he's just scared. He's definitely not trying to insult you.
As a member of society, one had to know when to speak one's heart and when to say things that were appropriate for the occasion. Momonga nodded and answered in a gentle way to put Aura at ease.
Of course, Aura. I have never doubted your loyalty.
Aura sighed in relief, and then she became serious again before shouting angrily at the VIP box.
Supreme Being Lord Momonga's come to visit us, but you, as a floor guardian, aren't even here to meet him. You should know how disrespectful that is. If you're too scared to jump down, maybe a quick kick will substitute for courage.
I'll take the stairs down.
How long do you want Lord Momonga to wait? Get over here now!
I got it!
Mare had gathered up his courage, but his voice still seemed unsteady. After that, a figure jumped out of the VIP box. As expected, it was a dark elf. This dark elf was particularly wobbly on his feet, completely different from how Aura had handled her landing. However, he did not seem to be hurt. He must have skillfully dissipated the force of landing with some athletic trick. After that, he immediately began running over as quickly as he could. However, his top speed was still much slower than Aura. She must have thought so too, because she frowned and shouted,
Hurry up!
I am!
The child who finally arrived in front of Momonga looked almost identical to Aura. They had to be twins, given the way they shared the same hair, the same eyes, and the same features. However, if Aura was the sun, then Mare was the moon. He looked nervous, as though he was afraid of being scolded. Momonga was surprised by the stark difference between the two. However, from what Momonga knew, Mare should not have been like this. Even if one wrote a long character description for their NPCs, it would not be reflected in their personalities. Yet these two dark elf children were displaying animated emotions in front of Momonga.
They must be the Aura and Mare that Buku Chagama wanted me to see.
Buku was the guild member who had designed these two dark elf characters.
If only she could have been here for this.
I'm sorry I kept you waiting, Lord Momonga.
He nervously raised his eyes to peek at Momonga. He wore a vest of blue dragon scales and a small cape that was as green as jungle leaves. His clothes had the same basic white color as Aura, but a short section of flesh peeked out below his short skirt. It was short because the rest of his legs were covered in white silk stockings. He had an acorn-shaped pendant on a necklace like Aura, but his was made of silver. Mare was much more lightly armed than Aura, with a pair of lustrous white gloves adorning his dainty little hands, and a gnarled black staff held in them. Mare Bello Fiore. Like Aura, he was a guardian of the 6th floor of the great underground tomb of Nazarick. Momonga squinted, though his eyes were merely empty sockets, and looked at them. Aura thrust her chest forward proudly, while Mare simply cowered under Momonga's gaze. He nodded several times, musing that the two of them were indeed the incarnation of his comrade's hard work.
I'm glad to see the two of you are in good spirits.
I'm positively overflowing with energy. Although, it's been a bit boring recently. It would be nice if we had an intruder or two.
I would rather not have to meet intruders. They're scary.
After hearing Mare's words, Aura's expression changed.
Lord Momonga, please excuse me for a while. Mare, come with me.
Ow, sis, that hurts.
After seeing Momonga nod slightly, Aura pinched Mare by the tip of one of his ears and dragged him away from Momonga. Then she began whispering into Mare's ear. Even from a distance, one could tell that she was scolding him.
Intruders, huh? Well, much like you, I don't want to meet them either, Mare.
At least I'd rather meet them after having the chance to make all the preparations I need.
Momonga thought as he watched the twin guardians from afar. After he snapped back to reality, Momonga realized that Mare was on his knees in front of Aura, who was hurling a torrent of abuse at him. Momonga smiled as the scene reminded him of the brother and sister who were his friends.
Good grief! Mare was clearly not made by Peroncino. Or is this because Buku believed that little brothers should listen to their big sisters? Though, come to think about it, Aura and Mare should have died once. How should I address that?
The invasion of 1,500 people had made it down to the 8th floor, which was to say, Aura and Mare should have died then. Did they remember anything about it? What meaning did the concept of death have for those two anyway? According to Yggdrasil's rules, death would cost a character 5 levels and force him to drop one of his equipped items. In other words, characters below level 5 would immediately disappear. Players were especially exempt from this and would not vanish, but they would be reduced to the minimum of level 1. Therefore, it must be an issue with the game rules. Using spells like Resurrection or Raise Dead would mitigate this level loss. In addition, with the use of cash items, one would only lose a bit of experience. It was simpler for NPCs. As long as the guild paid the requisite fees to resurrect them, they would be recalled to life without any ill effects. Therefore, players who want to respec their characters often favored using death to lower one's levels. While the loss of even a single level was a harsh punishment in a game where each level requires a lot of experience points, losing levels was not such a frightening prospect in Yggdrasil. This was because the game company wanted its players to explore previously undiscovered regions and find new things, instead of hunkering down in familiar territory because they were afraid of losing levels. With all this in mind, were the two people who perished in the wake of the 1,500-man invasion the same after their resurrection? Momonga wanted to verify this, but at the same time, he did not want to disturb them unduly. For all he knew, that large invasion might have been a traumatic experience for Aura. Momonga felt it would be unwise to question her in that manner when she had showed no overt signs of hostility. The important thing was that they were lovingly crafted NPCs of his friends in Ainz Ooal Gown. Perhaps after settling all the accumulated problems, he would ask her about it. In addition, the concept of death in-game might be different from outside it. Of course, if one died in reality, that was the end of everything. However, that might not be the case right now. He wanted to perform an experiment on this, but first he needed to collect information and establish his priorities. Thus, putting this matter aside would be a wise decision. After all, Momonga still had many doubts about how the Yggdrasil he knew had changed. Aura was still scolding Mare as Momonga stood in contemplation. Momonga pitied Mare a little. After all, he had not said anything that warranted such wrathful castigation. In the past, when brother and sister argued, all Momonga could do was watch. But now, things were different.
That should be enough, don't you think?
Lord Momonga, as a guardian, Mare?
It's fine. Aura, I understand how you feel. It is only natural that you would feel unhappy if Mare, as a floor guardian, said such a cowardly thing, especially if it were in my presence. However, I believe that if anyone invaded the great underground tomb of Nazarick, you and Mare would fearlessly step forward to engage them. There is no need for scoldings as long as one does what is required of them when the time comes.
Momonga walked up to between the two of them and helped Mare up.
And Mare, you should be grateful to your kind sister. Even if I were angry, I could not remain so after seeing how your sister scolded you.
Mare looked in surprise at his sister. At this moment, Aura hurriedly said,
Huh? No, it's not like that. I wasn't scolding him to show off in front of you, Lord Momonga.
Aura, it's fine. It doesn't matter what you had in mind. I understand your kind intentions. However, I must tell you that I am not dissatisfied with Mare's performance as a guardian.
Yeah. Thank you, Lord Momonga.
Thank you very much.
Momonga felt uncomfortable as he watched the two of them bow to him. He felt particularly ill at ease as he saw them look at him with their shining eyes. In order to camouflage the embarrassment he felt at being looked at that way, Momonga coughed.
That's right. Aura, I think you said something about being bored because there were no intruders.
No, about that.
After seeing Aura's fearful reaction, Momonga felt bad about asking his question.
I do not intend to reproach you for your answer, so feel free to speak your mind.
Yeah, a little. There's nobody around here who can spar with me for more than 5 minutes.
Aura touched her index fingers together before looking up hopefully to Momonga. As a guardian, Aura was level 100. There were precious few opponents in this dungeon which could rival her. There were 9 such NPCs, including Aura and Mare, as well as one other.
What if Mare was your opponent?
Mare's body trembled as he shrank away. He shook his head with moist eyes and he looked very afraid. Aura sighed as she saw the way he looked. As Aura sighed, a sweet scent filled the surrounding air. Unlike the fragrance Albedo radiated, this scent seemed somewhat persistent. As he remembered Aura's ability, Momonga took a step away from the scent.
Sorry, Lord Momonga.
As Aura noticed Momonga's strange reaction, she hurriedly dispersed the scent with her hand. Among Aura's skills as a beast tamer, there were certain passive skills that had buffing and debuffing effects. These abilities acted through her breath and had a radius of several meters, some even up to 10 meters. With the effect of certain skills, that radius could be enlarged to unbelievable proportions. In Yggdrasil, icons representing buffs and debuffs appeared in one's field of vision, so one could see if they were under the effect of an ability. However, no indication of these changes appeared before him, which made things quite troublesome.
It should be fine now. I cancelled it. Although, you're undead, so mind-affecting effects shouldn't work on you, right, Lord Momonga?
Is that so?
That was true in Yggdrasil. The undead were immune to mind-affecting effects, whether positive or negative.
Was I within the effective radius?
Aura lowered her head in fear, and so did Mare beside her.
I'm not angry, Aura.
Momonga said in as gentle a voice as he could manage.
Aura, you do not have to be so afraid. Do you think such a simple skill would inconvenience me? I was simply asking if I was within the effective range of your skill.
Yes, just now you were within range of my skill.
After hearing Aura's energetic answer as relief flooded back into her, Momonga realized that his very presence filled Aura with fear. Once he noticed this, he felt a clenching pain in his non-existent stomach. What if he became weaker from this? Every time he thought about that, he tried desperately to put it out of mind.
And what was its effect?
The effect just now should have been fear.
He did not feel afraid. In Yggdrasil, one would not be affected by attacks from the guild or party to which one belonged. Although, there was a very real chance this rule no longer applies, so it would be best to verify that now.
Aura, I was just thinking that your skill should not have an effect on people from the same guild. The same group.
Huh?
Aura's eyes went wide, much like Mare's did from the side. Judging from their reactions, Momonga realized that they did not agree with him.
Am I mistaken?
Yes. Could it be you mix it up with the ability to freely change the range of one's skills?
So it seemed the rule disabling friendly fire was no longer in effect. Mare was not affected while being near Aura, but that might be because he had equipped an item which negated mind-affecting effects on himself. In contrast, the undead Momonga's divine class items did not have any data which protected against mind-affecting effects. But in that case, why did Momonga not feel fear? There were two possibilities. He might have resisted it with his base stats, or resisted it with his immunities from being an undead creature. Because he was not sure which hypothesis was correct, Momonga decided to conduct an experiment.
Can you try using other effects?
Aura tilted her head and made a strange noise of bafflement. Momonga was reminded of a puppy, and he reached out to stroke Aura's head. Her hair and scalp felt smooth as silk, and caressing her was very comfortable. Because Aura did not seem to mind, Momonga wanted to keep going on. However, Mare looked a little frightened as he stared at them from the side, so he paused. What was Mare thinking anyway? After thinking for a short while, Momonga released his staff and ruffled Mare's head with his other hand. The quality of Mare's hair felt better, but Momonga hardly paid it any heed as he rubbed their heads until he was satisfied. Then, he remembered what he was there to do.
Then I have something to ask of you. I plan to conduct certain experiments. I'll need your help for them.
At first, the two of them did not know how to respond to that. However, when Momonga's hand left their heads, the two of them had embarrassed yet happy looks on their faces. Aura cheerfully replied,
Yes, I understand. Lord Momonga, leave it to me.
Momonga reached out a hand to quell Aura.
Before that,
Momonga gripped the floating staff in his hand. Just like before when he used the power of the ring, he focused on the staff. Among the many powers it possessed, Momonga concentrated on one of the gems which decorated the staff. It was a divine class item called the Gem of the Moon, and the ability Momonga chose called forth Moonlight Wolves. As the summoning magic took effect, 3 beasts appeared out of thin air. The special effects of the summoning were the same as in Yggdrasil, so Momonga was not surprised by them. Moonlight wolves looked very similar to Siberian wolves, but they radiated a silver glow. Momonga could feel a mysterious connection between himself and the Moonlight wolves. It clearly showed who was the master and the servant between them.
Are those moonlight wolves?
Aura's tone showed she did not understand. After all, she had no idea why Momonga would summon such weak monsters. Moonlight wolves were highly agile, and they were useful for ambushes, but they were only level 20 or so. They were very weak monsters compared to Aura and Momonga. However, monsters of this level were enough for their purposes this time around. In fact, the weaker they were, the better.
yes they are. Now, include me in the radius of your skill.
Huh? Really?
It's fine.
Momonga's insistence was so great that even the dubious Aura went ahead with it. Given that they were no longer in the game, there was a possibility he could not ignore, which was that Aura's skill might not have activated properly. In order to rule that out, he had to expose himself to the skill with a third party, which was why he had summoned the Moonlight Wolves. After that, Aura exhaled several times, but Momonga did not feel affected in any way. He tried relaxing or turning around in the middle of the skill, but he felt nothing strange. However, the moonlight wolf behind him was affected. Thus, he concluded that Aura's skill had taken effect. From this experiment, Momonga learned that mind-affecting effects did not work on him. This meant... In the game, demi-human and heteromorphic races unlocked racial skills when they reached certain levels. An overlord like Momonga had the following skills. Create high-tier undead 4 times per day. Create mid-tier undead 12 times per day. Create low-tier undead 20 times per day. Negative protection, dark soul, black halo, undead blessing, unholy protection, wisdom of darkness, speak evil tongues, ability damage 4, piercing damage resistance 5, slashing damage resistance 5, turn resistance 3, high tier physical immunity 3, high tier magic immunity 3, cold, acid, and electrical immunity, as well as arcane vision and see invisibility. And then there were the abilities from his class levels. Instant death magic enhancement, Rite of Darkness, Undead Aura, Undead Creation, Undead Control, Undead Strengthening, and so on. Then there were the basic special qualities which all undead possessed. Immunity to critical hits, mind-affecting, poison, disease, sleep, paralysis, death, and energy drain effects. Resistance to necromancy and biological penalties. Undead did not need to breathe, eat, or drink. They were healed by negative energy and had dark vision. Of course, they had weaknesses too, like good, light, and holy vulnerability 4, bludgeoning vulnerability 5, vulnerability to holy/good consecrated areas 2, double damage from fire, and so on. This meant that Momonga could be sure that he still possessed the basic abilities of an undead being, and his special skills gained through leveling up.
I see. Well, this was an informative experiment. Thank you, Aura. Are you alright?
Yes, I'm fine.
Is that so? Return.
The 3 moonlight wolves vanished as though time itself had turned backward for them.
Lord Momonga, did you come to our floor in order to perform those experiments just now?
Mare was nodding beside her.
Eh? Oh, no. In truth, I came here for training.
Training? For you, Lord Momonga?
Aura and Mare's eyes were so wide it seemed like they might fall out of their sockets. Their surprise was only natural. After all, who would expect to hear such a thing from Momonga, a powerful magic caster, the supreme ruler of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, as well as the one who stood above all? Momonga, who had anticipated this reaction, swiftly replied.
Indeed.
After seeing Momonga's swift reply, and hearing the light impact of his staff on the ground, realization dawned on Aura's face. Momonga was quite pleased with himself, as this reaction had fallen within his scope of prediction.
Is that the legendary weapon of the highest order which only you may wield, Lord Momonga?
Legendary weapon? What did you mean by that?
Momonga had his doubts, but after seeing Mare's shining eyes, he knew the questions had not been asked with ill intentions.
Indeed. This is the staff of Ainz Ooal Gown, which I made with the guild members.
Momonga raised the staff, and it immediately radiated a beautiful glow which lit up its surroundings. The glow was as blinding as the staff itself. However, the surroundings were filled with inauspicious flickering shadows, which emitted an aura of menace. Momonga's voice was more animated and proud when he spoke.
The 7 gems in the staff's snake mouths are all divine class artifacts. Since they all belong to a set, having them together unlocks even greater power beyond their base abilities. Gathering them all required an incalculable amount of time and effort, and many of our members stated they wanted to quit during the process. I can't even remember how many monsters we farmed for their drops. Anyway, in addition, the staff's power is beyond that of a divine class item. In fact, it almost approaches that of a world class item. Its most potent feature is its automatic engagement system and...
It would seem he had gotten carried away. He had built it with his comrades in the past, but because he had never taken it out before, there had been no chance for it to shine. Now that he had the chance to show it off, his praise surged forth like a rising tide. Momonga forcibly quelled his desire to flaunt the staff.
How embarrassing.
Something like that.
That's amazing!
That's totally awesome, Lord Momonga.
Momonga almost laughed as he saw their eyes. He tried his best to suppress the delighted expression on his face, although skeletons had no expressions, and continued.
Which is why I wanted to run some experiments with this staff. I hope you can help me.
Yes, Lord, understood. We'll go prepare right away. Then, could we see the power of the staff?
That's fine. Then, I shall show you a fraction of the power of this mighty staff, which only I can wield.
Awesome!
Aura exclaimed as she jumped up and down adorably. Mare was hard-pressed to hide his delight, as could be seen from the twitching tips of his ears.
This is bad. I can't let my stern facade slip because of this.
Momonga tried to regain his dignity as he reminded himself thusly.
And there is one more thing, Aura. I have already ordered the other guardians here. They will arrive within the hour.
Then we need to get ready for...
No, there is no need. All you need to do is stay here and wait for them.
Is that so? All the guardians? That means Shaltier's coming too?
All the guardians.
Aura's long ears suddenly drooped. However, Mare's reaction was not as exaggerated as Aura's. According to her backstory, Aura was designed to have a poor relationship with Shaltier. But that was probably not the case for Mare.
What would happen next?
Momonga sighed quietly.
Hello everyone, here we are again at the credits. It's so nice to see Lord Ainz has visited our floor. It's so awesome!
Sis? Shouldn't we be reading the credits now?
Oh, right. We're supposed to be reading the credits. Let's get to it then.
Well, wait, I'm going first?
Well, duh! Don't tell me you're going to kick it out.
Would you be mad if I did?
Mare, get to reading before I start pinching your ear.
Fine. The male narrator was played by Ian Virly. Lord Momonga was played by the Thepeachgod.
The lich voice of Lord Ainz was played by Syckniss. Albedo was played by Kassandra Cherry. Bello Fiora was played by Cinnamon Moths.
Mare Bello Fiore was played by ShadowGamingVA. Sebas Tian was played by Gilholm. Solution, Entoma, and Lupus were played by Bailey Doxey.
CZ Delta was played by JenaLapis. The instrumentals of the outro was done by Noan.
Additional music was composed by Shuji Katayama.
We hope you enjoyed listening.
Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the release of a new part.
We hope to see you all next time.
Long live Ainz Ooal Gown!